Good morning, everyone. My name is Shannon Craddock. I'm the Programs and Accreditations Manager at Perry Johnson Registrars. And I'll be leading today's webinar on root cause analysis and systemic corrective action. Today, all participants have been muted to ensure sound quality. If you have a question, please feel free to type it into the question feature of GoToWebinar, and I'll attempt to field as many questions as possible at the conclusion of today's prepared presentation. A recording of today's webinar will be available along with the slides within 24 hours to 48 hours from the conclusion of today's presentation. And our website is www.pjr.com. So today we're going to talk about why we're doing this, why this particular topic, and why we feel it's so important. In order to do effective problem solving, find the true root cause and the associated corrective action, it all starts with a well-written audit finding. So we'll talk about that. We'll then talk about corrections or actions taken to correct, put a Band-Aid on the problem. We'll talk about root cause analysis. And today we're going to focus on the 5 why technique. We'll talk about corrective actions, which are actions taken to prevent recurrence. And we'll talk about preventive actions, actions taken to prevent occurrence of an issue to begin with. And then we'll talk about what makes up a sound corrective action verification exercise. So why this topic? Hey, we want you to improve. PJR wants your organization to improve. We believe that there should be a strong correlation between how you do on your internal audits, your third party, your PJR audit, and your overall quality record with your customers. Are you providing on time, on quality product or an on time, on quality service? And contrary to popular belief, the purpose of a management systems audit isn't to convince the auditor to write as few nonconformities as possible, but it's to take systemic corrective action for each and every nonconforming situation found. And when we're doing a true root cause analysis and implementing a corrective action that prevents recurrence, those issues don't recur. And then we start to see that strong correlation. So when we talk about the audit finding, I'm getting a question here. I want to make sure that people are seeing my slides. Oh, it's about the audio. I'll try speaking up, Heinz. I hope the audio gets better. An audit finding should have 3 distinct parts: statement of nonconformity, objective evidence, and a citation of the requirement not being met. Audit findings that do not contain these 3 parts should not be written by any PJR auditors and should not be accepted by PJR clients. So I'm telling you that you are empowered here. If you get a poorly written nonconformity, you should reject it back to the lead auditor. Do so right at the closing meeting. Some of our auditors make a decision to write opportunities for improvement. And if an opportunity for improvement is written, it should only exist as a statement or recommendation. It's not a non-conforming situation, so it won't have those 3 distinct parts. There's no citation of a requirement that isn't being met, because if a requirement was not being met, it would be a non-conforming situation. So one of the most common pitfalls with the statement of nonconformity nonconformity is that often the nonconformity that's written is not the problem, but a symptom of the problem. So we must be careful to express the issue as an issue with the system. If the problem is being expressed in terms of a person, a gauge, or a specific incident, it's at the symptom stage, and we want to avoid this. And I often see when I'm auditing that organizations' internal auditors make these mistakes, and newer third-party auditors also make these mistakes. So we want our problem solvers to get to the true problem, the systemic issue, or the problem-solving efforts will not be effective. Because fixing symptoms will not stop the issue from recurring. And I usually try to step back at this point in the presentation and illustrate this with a very common example. We're in the middle of cold and flu season here, especially in Michigan. And if you're feeling lousy, you're running a fever, have a sore throat, you can take Tylenol or Aleve to alleviate those symptoms. And that may bring your fever down, and it may temporarily stop with sore throat pain. You could take a cough drop to soothe your cough. But all we're doing is addressing the symptoms. If you have a strep throat infection, all the Tylenol and cough drops in the world aren't going to kill that strep throat bacteria. So if you truly have a strep throat infection, a systemic issue, you have to go to a practitioner and you need to have the issue addressed and take an antibiotic. Additionally, a well-written nonconformity should stand the test of time. Your organization should be able to look back at nonconformities written years ago and understand exactly what the problem was. So there should be sufficient detail so we know exactly what samples were pulled that led the auditor to draw a conclusion. So let's take a look at two examples. First, a poorly written finding. There was no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 indicating competence to run that job. So this poorly written nonconformity is that first pitfall we discussed. This is written in terms of symptoms and not the true systemic issue. We're confusing objective evidence with the statement of nonconformity. We're writing this up in terms of a very specific person and incident. The first shift operator running job 9954. A better way to write this. The system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. The second part of that, the objective evidence, contains all the specific details we saw that allows us to make that statement about the system. So there's no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 indicating competence. We then cite the ISO 9001 relevant requirements 7.2D, and you'll note that we're using the D suffix, bringing this out as far as possible into 7.2. We're not just saying section 7 or section 7.2. So you'll see here in the statement of nonconformity, we use the word system. The objective evidence is expressed in terms of a specific person or incident. So the better way to write this is the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. We're focusing on the systemic issue. In fact, that word system is right in the statement of nonconformity. We're not focusing on the incident, the one discrete symptom that we saw for first shift operator running job 9954. Okay, let's look at another poorly written finding. The quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. Once again, we're expressing this in terms of a symptom, a very specific incident and person, and not the systemic issue. And once again, we're confusing objective evidence with a statement of non-conformity. A better way to write this, the document control system, again, using the word system right in that statement of nonconformity. The document control system is not completely effective. Substantiating that with the symptoms we saw, that is, the quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. And citing the most specific requirement we can find, 7531A of 9001/2015. So a better way to write this finding is the document control system is not completely effective. Again, causing the problem solver to think about the systemic issue and not just the symptoms of the problem. We don't want them taking Tylenol and popping cough drops. They need to figure out what's really wrong. A problem statement needs to focus on the systemic issue and not just the incident or symptoms. So, in conclusion of this subsection, when you review a statement of nonconformity written by your internal auditor, your PJR auditor, or maybe a customer who's doing the second party audit of you, you want to ask yourself, are they distinguishing between the symptoms of the problem and the real problem? The symptoms being a sore throat, a fever, a headache, and the real problem being a strep throat infection. Does the final statement of nonconformity focus on a systemic issue, the broken system, the broken process? And are there sufficient data, objective evidence of the symptoms that were reviewed during the audit, and a clear, detailed citation of the requirement not being met to assist in understanding the incident? PJR has an internal document. It's our advisory 3, which requires all auditors to document any non-fulfillment of a requirement as such. In fact, we tell them it's absolutely inexcusable not to do so. There's no benefit for the auditee and really contributes to the diminishment of the integrity of accredited management system certification. Many of my colleagues have heard me say that consistency is key to client satisfaction. So you don't want to have an audit with one auditor and get no findings, and then have that followed up by another auditor and have many findings. If auditors were doing their job every time, writing findings where findings exist, and of course not writing findings if no findings exist, that's when we're going to get those consistent, predictable results from auditor to auditor. So it's PJR's expectation that all nonconformities written by PJR auditors need to be documented as I just described. Encourage your internal auditors to do the same. Okay, let's talk about actions taken to correct a problem. These are called corrections or containment actions. Containment is sometimes isolated to product. These are actions taken with respect to the symptom or incident and are therefore incident-specific actions. They're very important and they should be taken immediately to stop the symptoms from persisting. I often analogize this to putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound. You want to try to stop the bleeding, stop the problem from getting worse before you figure out what's causing you to bleed, the root cause of the issue. Now, actions taken to correct generally fall into 2 categories. We calibrated the gauge, we controlled the form, or adding a layer of inspection to catch any further occurrence of the issue. However, keep in mind that adding inspection adds cost to the system, not value. we're going to see that once corrective action is implemented, and you can only implement corrective action after you find the true root cause, then costly added inspections can be removed from your system. Any containment actions or corrections that you take should be very specific. So if we take our two examples we've been following through this webinar, the training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 was updated to reflect his competency to run the job unsupervised. So in this case, the organization researched, hey, that particular first shift operator, yes, he was trained, just didn't update the matrix, he's good to go, let's get that matrix updated. Or the quality auditor in the blue cell who was using an uncontrolled form, we got rid of all the copies of the uncontrolled form. They were hard copies or deleted it from the server or SharePoint if they were electronic copies. An often missed step in the process is that corrections also need to include an extent analysis. Another word for an extent analysis is a look across. So the internal auditor or the third-party auditor might have found one instance, perhaps 2 or 3, but how many more are there? In other words, what's the depth and breadth of the problem? So if our auditor found one training matrix for one operator that wasn't updated, could the training matrices be out of date for more operators? Or are there more instances of uncontrolled documents in the organization? You need to understand the depth and breadth of the problem by doing a complete look across and include that in your corrective action response. A few more words on extent analysis. The PGR auditor may uncover one or more examples of a non-conforming situation. A single gauge out of calibration, one document that isn't controlled, or a training record that is updated. A properly executed and well-written extent analysis would read like this. We verified the 2 gauges found by the PGR auditor, number 2458 and number 1354. Both were conforming. Our extent analysis included the 213 other gauges in our facility. Only one was found to be out of calibration. It was calibrated and returned to service. No product was measured with this gauge since it was last in a known state of calibration. This is a very well executed and well written extent analysis. Yes, you need to look at every other gauge in your facility. No, I don't care if there are 20,000 gauges. Our auditor found one. How many more are there? In order to ensure that an extent analysis occurs consistently, we've modified our nonconformity report, the audit report that we give to you, to include a blank for extent analysis. Now, it is optional, and you can always use your own nonconformity or corrective action form. But if you use your own, you must still include an extent analysis. Okay, let's move on to root cause analysis. Many corrective action reports restate the incident for the root cause analysis. This is not acceptable. So an example would be, our organization failed to update the training matrix for the operator running job 9954. Well, the PGR auditor already knows that. We told you that the first shift operator running job 9954 didn't have an up-to-date training matrix. Similarly, the The quality auditor in the blue cell didn't use the correct form to record the results of first vehicle inspection. Again, we already told you this. You're not telling us why these happened. Another common pitfall is that some corrective action reports will give containment actions for the root cause analysis and restate what was written for correction or containment. This is not acceptable either. So this is the single most important slide in today's webinar. So if you're checking your email or looking at social media, please tune in and listen. A good root cause analysis answers the following question. What in the system failed such that the problem occurred? Again, what in the system failed such that the problem occurred? There's that word system right in that question. We're focusing on the broken system and not the incident. It's possible that a problem may have multiple root causes, several possible root causes. If the root cause cannot be discovered, all of the possible root causes require corrective action. If the root cause has been found, the problem should be able to be turned on and off like a light switch by recreating the defect. I'm going to talk more about recreating the defect in a moment. If the problem cannot be turned on and off like a light switch or at will, then the root cause has probably not been found. Now, I used to work in automotive manufacturing, and we were having some significant issues with a dual cavity tool that produced a left hand and a right hand part. And what was happening is the left hand parts were getting packed in right hand boxes and vice versa. We were getting rejections from our customer, which happened to be General Motors, so we convened a problem-solving team. And the team concluded that the arrangement of the very narrow manufacturing cell was quite illogical. And when the auditor was doing pack out of the left hand and right hand parts, the left hand box and the right hand box were not located on the left hand side of the operator's body and the right hand side of the operator's body, which would have been logical. Due to the narrow configuration of the manufacturing cell, the pack out boxes were one in front and behind the other. So the left hand box was directly in front of the operator and the right hand box was behind that. So they had to remember left hand was right in front of them, right hand was behind that, and that was not working. So we ended up moving 3 manufacturing presses, the press in question and the 2 on either side of it, to have a more logical configuration of that manufacturing cell. So the left-hand pack-out box was on the left-hand side of the operator's body, and the right-hand pack-out box was on the right-hand side of the operator's body. And we thought we had a root cause. But once we implemented that change, while the instances or the incidents were going down, we were seeing fewer mixed hands in the pack-out boxes. It was still happening. We hadn't turned the problem off like a light switch. So we knew we did not have the true root cause or all possible root causes. I'll continue this story in just a few minutes. Let's go back to the slides. There are a lot of different techniques for root cause analysis. Is this not a fishbone or Ishikawa diagram, the 5 why technique? Sometimes you can get there in fewer whys. So let's take a look at how to use the why technique by picking the first example that we've been following through this webinar. Recall our statement of finding. The system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. There was no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 indicating competence to run that job. Well, why not? We begin by asking why over and over until we get to the root cause. Well, why wasn't there a training matrix? Well, the first shift supervisor failed to update the training matrix as required by the first of the month. Well, why did the supervisor fail to do that? Well, before the end of the previous month, the HR manager would email the training matrix template to all of the supervisors, but that didn't happen this time. Why didn't it happen? Well, the HR manager left the company before the end of the month, and her replacement didn't email the template to all the supervisors. Well, why didn't the HR manager's replacement email the template? The procedure for training didn't include a requirement to prompt the new HR manager to email the template to all of the supervisors. Now, this organization stopped after 4 whys, and that may be sufficient. Sometimes it's difficult to tell. And I always joke and say, you'll recall when you were little and you wanted something or you wanted to do something, and you would ask your parents and they would say no, and you would keep asking again and again, why not? And they would finally say, because I'm the parent and I said so. When you feel like you've gotten to that point, I'm the parent and I said so, in your line of questioning, you can have some degree of confidence that you've gone far enough. Additionally, there should be a team asking why over and over again, not just one person. You need a multidisciplinary, cross-functional team involved in problem solving. Somebody is going to bring the perspective that really hits the nail on the head and helps you determine the truth. Okay, let's go through this exercise again with the second finding. The document control system is not completely effective. We have a quality auditor in the blue cell using an uncontrolled form to record the results. Well, why were they using an uncontrolled form? Controlled hard copies of the form had all been used. So the quality auditor resorted to an uncontrolled form, probably a previous revision level. Well, why did they do that? Well, the quality auditor in the blue cell was not aware that when no hard copies of a particular form were available, that the latest version of all forms could be accessed through the company's database. Why didn't they know this? The blue cell quality auditor was not given a username and password to access the database. Why weren't they given a username and password? HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires are granted a system username and password. Again, after 4 whys, our organization felt that they had gone far enough. Let's talk now about what we will not accept for root cause, oversight. We see oversight a lot. If you're writing oversight in response to a PGR nonconformity, know that it will get rejected. We misunderstood the requirement. Now, in all honesty, I do have a little bit of tolerance for this. And this type of root cause is acceptable on an initial audit, a stage 1 or stage 2, or maybe in a transition to a new version of the standard, where you may not have understood the intent of a requirement or what it was asking for. However, in surveillance audit 37, this is not acceptable. We forgot another ISO 9001 blunder. Our consultant messed up, or human error. Okay, let's move on to corrective actions. Corrective actions should address the root cause. They therefore should answer that very important question: what in the system failed such that the problem occurred? A lot of times organizations repeat their correction or containment action as a corrective action. This is not acceptable. There's a difference between a correction and a containment action, which are the band-aids we put on the problem before we even know what the root cause is. A difference between those and a corrective action, which is intended to eliminate the root cause. So corrective actions should not only address the system, but they should be irreversible. And they should involve a change in the system. Retraining in and of itself is generally not a system change. Chances are you trained on the event initially. How is retraining going to make a difference? And as I already stated, incident-specific actions or corrections, containment actions are different than corrective actions. In the automotive and other industries, corrective actions should prompt a change to your design FEMA, possibly your PFEMA and control plan. There needs to be at least one corrective action for each root cause that has been identified. And subsequent data show that the problem has 100% disappeared, or that we've completely turned the light switch off. So recall that example I told you about in automotive manufacturing. In this example, we reconfigured the manufacturing cell to have the left-hand pack-out box on the left-hand side of the operator's body, and the right hand of the part, that pack-out box, was on the right-hand side of the operator's body. And while we had fewer incidents of mixed parts in boxes, it was still occurring. So we knew we did not have the true root cause or all possible root causes because we hadn't turned the problem off like a light switch, making it 100% disappear. So what we ended up doing is reconvening our problem-solving team. And this time, we invited a material handler from third shift. And that person said, you know, if it was impossible to put a left-hand part in a right-hand box and a right-hand part in a left-hand box, the problem would 100% disappear. So that's exactly what we did. We worked with our packaging engineering team, and they added some dividers into the bin, and it was impossible to put a left-hand part in a right-hand box and vice versa. We implemented that new packaging, got customer approval, and the problem 100% disappeared. We turned off the light. When we recreated the defect by removing that re-engineered packaging, we were able to recreate the defect, and we knew we had the true root cause. All right, let's look at corrective actions for the two nonconformity examples we've been following throughout this webinar. You'll recall the first one, the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. We had that first shift operator on job 9954. Corrective action. Section 4.6 of the procedure for training was updated to include a requirement for the HR manager to email the training matrix template to all supervisors for updating before the end of the month. The new HR manager was trained on this added requirement, and she added an automatic reminder to Outlook to perform this task. So you'll notice that this corrective action includes training. She was trained. However, it's not the only component of the corrective action. There's a permanent system change. Procedure for training has been updated. She's added a reminder to her Outlook. Question we want to ask is, does this address our root cause? Well, let's scroll back. The procedure for training did include a requirement to prompt the new HR manager to email the template to all supervisors. And now that has happened, procedure for training has been updated. There's a training event for the HR manager, and they added an Outlook reminder to their calendar. We have a corrective action that addresses the root cause. Let's look at our second example. The document control system is not completely effective. The new hire work instruction was revised to include a requirement to grant new hires a username and password for the database as appropriate. HR personnel were trained on this change. Again, training is part of the corrective action, but it's not the only component of the corrective action. There's a permanent system change in updating the work instruction. Question we want to ask is, does this corrective action address the root cause? HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires are granted a system username and password. That is our root cause. And now we have a corrective action that states the new hire work instruction was revised to include a requirement to grant new hires a username and password. A corrective action that addresses the root cause. Now, only time will tell if it's the true root cause and the problem is 100% disappeared. Sometimes corrective actions need to age a bit in order for you, before you can conclude that they are effective. When training is part of the corrective action response, as we saw with both of these examples, the response should also contain the technique that will be used to verify training effectiveness. And this is because chances are you've already done some training beforehand that wasn't effective. How now is retraining going to be effective? Are you administering a quick exam or test after the training to make sure the concept is understood? That's one way to ensure effectiveness. Okay, let's move to preventive actions. The reason I include this is these are distinct from corrective actions and that they answer one of the following questions. What other systems exist that might have the same root cause present? Or what systems could I have had in place that would have prevented this from happening? Many corrective action reports put corrective actions for preventive actions. This is not appropriate. They should address the future, not the past. What could still happen, not what did happen. If they were addressing what did happen, it would be a corrective action. They should address the symptom, not an incident or symptoms. There's no symptoms of something that hasn't happened yet. And they need to involve changing the system to prevent future problems. Preventive actions are not identified only because of nonconformities. Management system standards require preventive action as a proactive process to manage risk, essentially, with inputs from multiple sources. Near-miss reports, 5S programs, or other lean initiatives, analysis of FEMA, employee suggestions, etc. In other words, no nonconformity should never mean no preventive actions. All right, let's talk about verification. This is a critical and often not performed step in the problem-solving process. And many CAR forms do not have places for verification at the appropriate locations. So let's talk about what should be verified. Number one, you want to make sure that you've taken a correction or containment to stop the bleeding. So if one gauge was not calibrated, did you get that gauge calibrated or verify that it was in a conforming state? And did you do your look across at all of the gauges? Proper root cause analysis needs to have been performed, and you're able to turn the problem off and on like a light switch, recreating the defect. Did you implement an irreversible systemic corrective action that addresses the root cause? And if your containment action or correction was of that costly added layer of inspection, you've removed it because now you've identified the true root cause and corrective action. So in my automotive example, mixing the left-hand and right-hand parts, before we understood what the root cause was, we had somebody doing 100% verification on all of the boxes. Once we knew what the true root cause was, we removed this costly added layer of inspection. And you've taken a preventive action if appropriate. Understand when you're doing verification that corrective actions could be reversible. When you're changing the system, it means you're changing how work is performed. Change is difficult for people. Systems tend to return to where people feel comfortable. So you need to continue to verify actions even after you get positive results on the first verification. People may have just been retrained and are doing things appropriately. You want to make sure that you're doing multiple verifications at different points in time after implementation of the corrective action to make sure that those actions are truly irreversible. I would like to acknowledge IEOB for providing some of today's slide content. And I will now open the floor up to any questions or comments you have. Again, all participants have been muted to ensure sound quality, so feel free to type questions into the question feature. And while I wait for those questions to come in, remember that a copy of today's slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available from pjr.com under previously recorded webinars within 24 to 48 hours. Additionally, our website is a great resource for training. Please check out the webinar section for content, new content every month on various changes to the management system standards, transitions, and other great content on doing well on your third-party audits. Erin, we are not giving certificates for today's webinars. We simply have too many webinars to issue certificates. Yes, the fishbone analysis is different from 5Y Susie, and they don't necessarily need to be implemented together. Susie's asking, when would you use one technique for root cause over the other? I don't necessarily think, Susie, that one technique is better. People use what they feel comfortable and are trained in. Sometimes your customer may stipulate a specific technique and you would have to use that. It looks like at least one of you was struggling with sound quality. Let me apologize for that, and I will look into what might be causing that, if it's an issue on PJR's end. We'll wait a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. Okay, Heinz is asking, do you have a sample form you could share? A great sample nonconformity or problem-solving form is included in the PGR workbook that you get at the end of your audit. Ursula's bringing up a great point. She says, why stop the 5Y at failure to have a policy and continue to ask why there failed to be a policy? Potentially, yeah, you could do that, Ursula. The argument could be made that maybe you could go a little bit further. In this case, the organization didn't feel so. Faisal brings up ISO 9001 does not mention preventive measures. Right, but you're correct. There used to be a section in older versions of 9001 that specifically called out preventive measures, but 9001 does talk about managing risk, preventing risk. Faisal, if you want to clarify your last comment. One of our participants is providing a root cause analysis standard. It's a British standard, BSEN 62740/2015. Thank you for that resource, Faisal. Yes, Raphael, you should only take away containment actions that are of that costly added layer of inspection, not corrective actions, since corrective actions address the root cause. You are correct. Okay, that appears to be it in terms of questions. I know everyone's time is valuable, and I thank you for spending this hour with me. Please check out www.pjr.com for information on this webinar and upcoming webinar events at PJR.